There's a specific kind of existence reserved for those who simply see too much. You walk into an ordinary room, a space where no voices are raised and no dramatic gestures are made. Yet within seconds, your nervous system has cataloged a vast array of invisible tensions. You notice the forced curvature of a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the subtle avoidance of a glance, the microscopic shift in posture when a particular name is mentioned. For you, the world is devoid of neutral interactions. Everything is a transmission of hidden data. People often romanticize this level of observation, praising it as a superpower, a profound emotional intelligence, or a rare intuitive gift. But the quiet truth, the one you rarely speak aloud to anyone, is that this extreme clarity is a psychological trap. Your brain lacks the fundamental mechanism of an off switch. You cannot merely inhabit a moment and let it wash over you. Instead, you extract the moment, carry it home, dissect its anatomy, and replay it endlessly in the quiet dark. You are the kind of person who can take a single, fleeting silence in a conversation and turn it into an entire universe of anxious thoughts. If you live with this condition, you already know the heavy toll it takes on your soul. Hyperawareness is not simply an issue of intelligence or being sharper than the rest of the room. It is the relentless burden of constantly perceiving the hidden layers of meaning that ordinary people walk past without a second thought. It can feel like a profound gift when you help a friend navigate their inner turmoil, but it is also a cruel anchor that slowly drags you beneath the surface, draining your emotional reserves drop by drop. Today, we are peering into the dark architecture of the overly aware mind. We will explore how this state is constructed and, more importantly, how you can survive it without being entirely swallowed by your own inescapable capacity to understand the quiet suffering and unspoken motives of the world around you. To understand this burden, we must first trace it back to its origins. Psychology generally divides this phenomenon of extreme awareness into two primary categories. For the first group of people, this heightened sensitivity is entirely innate, a biological destiny woven into their DNA. Science refers to them as highly sensitive persons, individuals who carry the specific trait known as sensory processing sensitivity. From the exact moment they enter the world, their nervous system functions like an ultrafine filter that automatically absorbs and processes everything with a terrifying intensity. For them, reality has always been broadcast in agonizingly high resolution. Sounds are sharper, lights are brighter, and the emotional frequencies of strangers vibrate directly through their skin. But for the second group, overawareness was never a genetic gift. It is a heavy inheritance forged in the chaotic fires of survival. Neuroscience identifies this acquired state as hypervigilance, and it almost always takes root in an emotionally unstable environment during the most formative years of life. Imagine a small child growing up in a house where the emotional atmosphere of the adults fluctuates as violently and unpredictably as a coastal storm. That child does not have the luxury of living innocently. To survive the turbulence, they must evolve into a biological radar station. They're the children who learn to memorize the specific crunch of car tires rolling into the driveway, using the speed and weight of the sound to calculate whether their father is returning home calm or deeply volatile. They learn to interpret the exact force with which a kitchen cabinet is shut, measuring the precise decibel of the wood hitting the frame to determine their mother's suppressed rage. They know exactly when they are permitted to step into the hallway and offer a performance of a smile. And they know the exact moment they must dissolve quietly into the shadows of their bedroom. They were not simply raised. They were trained by fear to predict the unpredictable weather of the adults holding their fragile lives. Biologically speaking, the amygdala, the brain's primal danger alarm, has been permanently wedged into the active position. It constantly records and broadcasts a singular, terrifying message. This environment is inherently unsafe, and you must continually scan the horizon to avoid sudden catastrophe. No one ever sat them down and explicitly taught them this behavior. Instead, Their nervous system automatically constructed a dense network of specialized neurons designed solely to predict emotional disasters long before they manifest in reality. Over the passage of years, that desperate survival vigilance calcifies into chronic awareness. That hyper-awareness sinks so deeply into their bones that it becomes indistinguishable from their core identity. When these children inevitably grow into adults, they frequently look back at their own behavior and brutally blame themselves. They wonder why they always overthink, assuming they are fundamentally broken or defective. But they are not broken in the slightest. They are simply wielding a type of intelligence violently shaped by the necessity of survival. The defensive shield that once kept them safe from unpredictable harm has now fused permanently into their adult skin. So, when this massive, unyielding awareness enters the mundane realities of adult life, how does it actually manifest? We enter the first major symptom, living in a state of constant, exhausting analysis. This is the most visible sign, and easily the one that consumes the highest volume of psychological energy. For an ordinary individual, a casual conversation is exactly that, a brief exchange of words. But for the overly aware person, the mind is perpetually running complex, hidden equations in the background. Consider a mundane scenario. A manager sends a brief message late in the afternoon asking for a quick chat. For most, this is a standard administrative request. But for the hyper-aware mind, a tidal wave of tension spikes instantly. They sense an invisible coldness in the punctuation. They psychoanalyze the timing of the message, and they immediately begin auditing every action they took that week. They do not merely hear the spoken words. They hear the negative space around them. They clock the imperceptible 3-second hesitation before a friend offers a compliment, instantly registering the potential insincerity. They catch the microscopic hitch in a partner's breathing that signals concealed frustration. Much of this relentless processing is driven by an overactive default mode network, the neurological system responsible for self-referential thought and deep reflection. In an average brain, this network hums quietly during moments of rest or idle daydreaming. But in the hyper-aware mind, this network is aggressively dominant, dragging consciousness into a perpetual loop of interpretation. Half of their visible self is smiling, nodding, and holding a cup of coffee like a normal participant in society. But the invisible half is furiously taking notes, cross-referencing micro-expressions, and analyzing the structural integrity of the interaction. Consequently, their brain never experiences genuine rest. They can spend an entire day sitting completely still in a silent room and end up feeling physically decimated by evening. This relentless analytical machine does not merely point its lens outward at the world. It routinely flips the camera inward, leading us to the second sign, hyper-self-awareness. In the realm of psychology, metacognition is defined as the ability to observe and evaluate your own thought processes. It is a vital function of the prefrontal cortex. While everyone possesses this ability to some degree, for the overly aware, it is a blinding floodlight that can never be switched off. They do not have the privilege of simply experiencing an emotion in its raw form. They must actively monitor it, grade it, and interrogate it. The sequence is brutally familiar. A feeling arises, it is immediately placed under a microscope, and then it is severely judged. They might be walking through a park on a beautiful day and suddenly feel a wave of sorrow. Instead of letting the sadness wash through them, they cross their arms mentally and demand justification, angrily questioning why they are failing at being happy. Even moments of spontaneous joy are subjected to this clinical dissection. They might be at a crowded dinner party, throwing their head back in genuine laughter at a joke. But a fraction of a second later, a detached part of their consciousness is floating near the ceiling, looking down at their own body, harshly evaluating the performance. They wonder if the laugh was too loud, if it sounded desperate, or if they took up too much space in the room. Living this way is exactly like trying to perform a complex, beautiful dance while staring unblinkingly into a tall mirror to correct your posture in real time. You might technically execute every single step with flawless precision, but you entirely lose the transcendent magic of the flow. The depth of their self-awareness expands endlessly, but their natural, unscripted presence in the physical world slowly evaporates. They become a ghost haunting their own life, watching themselves exist rather than actually tasting the air in their lungs. When that internal surveillance camera runs without interruption for years, they inevitably drift into the third symptom, the complete loss of relational innocence. Because their awareness runs so deep, they perpetually see the backstage scaffolding of human behavior. Psychology links this to an overdeveloped theory of mind, the capacity to infer the hidden intentions and internal states of others. They reach a point where they realize, with heavy finality, that human beings almost never say exactly what they mean. If a colleague unexpectedly brings them a coffee and offers glowing praise, their brain rejects the surface-level kindness. Instead, it instantly runs a threat assessment, scanning for the hidden motive. They wonder what favor is about to be requested or what boundaries are being softly tested. They learn, often through painful repetition, that affection is frequently a calculated investment, and that a confident swagger on a date is usually a fragile curtain hiding a deep, terrified fear of rejection. This creates a profound, quiet grieving process. It is not the sudden loss of childhood innocence, but the slow, agonizing death of relational trust. The simple luxury of believing the surface of a promise is entirely stripped away. Consequently, a warm compliment always carries the weight of a hidden agenda. An apology never feels entirely genuine because they suspect the other person is merely attempting to pacify the conflict, rather than actually accepting moral responsibility.
A grand promise sounds incredibly fragile, hollowed out by the statistical probability of human failure. Importantly, these hyper-aware individuals rarely become hateful, malicious, or outwardly bitter toward society. They simply become exceptionally cautious, wrapping their softest parts in layers of invisible armor. They often experience a crushing sense of loneliness even while standing in the center of a crowded room, because it feels as though no one else is capable of perceiving the dark, complicated layer of truth that they are forced to witness every single day. This layered perception is not merely a cognitive exercise in logic. It bleeds directly into their physical nervous system, bringing us to the fourth sign, an empathy that is permanently locked in the ON position. For ordinary people, empathy is a tool, a compassionate state they willingly enter when a loved one is crying. For the hyper-aware, it is a dangerous porousness that cannot be defended against. They can walk into a completely silent meeting room and immediately feel the suffocating weight of unexpressed hostility radiating between two people at the table. Their psyche functions like a sheet of highly absorbent paper dropped into dark water. While cognitive empathy allows a person to rationally understand someone else's perspective, emotional empathy forces the overly aware individual to literally absorb and inhabit the psychological pain of another human being. They do not just recognize the suffering, they host it inside their own chest, entirely blurring the boundary between where the stranger ends and where they begin. This exhausting absorption is tied directly to the brain's mirror neuron system. When they witness someone else experiencing profound emotion, these specific neurons fire with such violence that the hyper-aware person's brain registers the emotion as a first-hand experience. A stranger sitting next to them on a train bounces their knee with suppressed anxiety, and instantly, the hyper-aware person's own heart rate begins to accelerate in matched panic. A friend casually mentions the lingering grief of a recent divorce, and 3 days later, that exact grief is still sitting like a heavy stone in the listener's stomach. Because of this, they inevitably become the designated emotional regulator for their entire social circle. They instinctively know how to soften the pitch of their voice, how to select words that diffuse anger, and how to manipulate the atmosphere to keep everyone else comfortable. People flock to them because they provide a profound sense of feeling seen and deeply understood without asking for anything in return. But the silent price of providing that comfort is absolute, crushing exhaustion. They transform into a biological container for the emotional waste of everyone around them. At the end of the day, Very few of the people who rely on them ever stop to realize that the person who flawlessly understands everyone else is starving for someone to understand them. These absorbed, suppressed emotions do not simply evaporate into the ether. They migrate directly into the physical tissue, leading to the fifth sign, the somatic anxiety loop. This involves an overactive sense of interoception, the brain's ability to monitor the internal physical state of the body, which is governed by the insular cortex. For the overly aware, this internal monitoring system is catastrophically sensitive. They might drink a strong cup of coffee, causing a mild, normal elevation in heart rate. But their hypervigilant brain detects the change, aggressively references its trauma database, and falsely screams that a life-threatening panic attack is currently unfolding. This triggers a brutal, self-sustaining loop of physical terror. A mundane somatic sensation occurs, the brain radically misinterprets it as imminent danger, and the body obediently floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. This chemical flood creates even more intense physical symptoms, completely confirming the brain's false alarm. Their physical vessel becomes a chaotic stream of emergency data. They feel a restless, crawling unease vibrating under their skin at all hours of the day, even when they are sitting safely in the comfort of their own home. When the internal alarms of the body and the external observations of the mind become too overwhelming to bear, the psyche searches for one final escape hatch to restore order. This is when awareness quietly mutates from a lens of simple observation into a desperate strategy of control. This is not about controlling other people forcefully. It is an invisible, internal defense mechanism designed to manipulate reality through sheer mental calculation and endless predictive paranoia. They operate on a deeply ingrained, unspoken philosophy. If they can successfully calculate every possible variable and predict every potential disaster, they will never be blindsided by pain. For them, hyperanalysis becomes a heavy suit of armor. They falsely believe that if they can visualize the exact moment of a relationship's failure before it happens, the actual collapse will not destroy them. Their mind runs complex disaster simulations endlessly in the background. They obsess over what to do if their partner suddenly abandons them, or how they will survive if their career turns to ash overnight.
This leads directly to severe analysis paralysis. They trap themselves inside a maze of dark assumptions, living out a dozen tragic futures while the present moment slips through their fingers entirely unnoticed. In their desperate attempt to stay one step ahead of suffering, they completely abandon their own life, sacrificing the beauty of the present to stand guard against the phantom ghosts of a future that does not exist. So, what is the path forward for the overly aware? You cannot simply flip a switch and turn off your profound capacity to see. Asking you to become less aware is like demanding a person with perfect vision to artificially blur their eyes. The ultimate solution is not to blind yourself. It is to fundamentally stop carrying the weight of everything you observe. In therapeutic terms, this means building rigid emotional boundaries and refusing to absorb the energy you detect. You must internalize 3 liberating truths. First, not every silence contains a hidden indictment of your character. Second, not every internal anxious sensation requires an immediate investigation. Sometimes a fast heartbeat is just a fast heartbeat. Third, and most importantly, not every psychological flaw you observe in another person is your responsibility to fix. When you finally stop trying to carry the world's emotional equations, your awareness softens. You cannot shatter the bulb of your brilliant mind, but you can choose to transform it from a harsh, burning laser into a warm, gentle candle.